Wouldn't know a conservative if he met one. All right, he's never been a conservative. He's probably a big part of why we have such a massive debt in this country.
Now, the Senate voted 50-47 to begin debate on the 2018 budget resolution yesterday. Senator Paul voted yes, but has not committed to supporting the underlying resolution.
Former White House strategist Steve Bannon showed up in Arizona last night to boost the candidacy of Kelly Ward in her Republican primary challenge to incumbent Republican Senator Jeff Flake. But he took special aim at Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and, quote, elites who look down on Trump supporters.
They hold you in total and complete contempt. They think that you're a group of morons. But if you gave me the choice between being governed by the first 100 people that showed up tonight for this rally or the top 100 partners at Goldman Sachs, I would take the first 100 people here. The last couple of days, Mitch has been saying this big thing, hey, you got to win. You know, winners make policy, losers go home. Hey, Mitch, note to self, Mitch, Big Luther Strange and little Bobby Corker are both going home. These people, Mitch, it's 2-0.
All right, joining us now from Washington is Politico's Daniel Littman, once again co-author of the Politico Playbook. So even President Trump seemed to recognize that Steve Bannon might be going a bit too far in challenging senators across the country. He made reference to that at a White House comment earlier in the week with Mitch McConnell. But Politico is reporting that Bannon has some establishment support. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so he's made this big push of having challengers to every Republican incumbent and having his own candidates in every Senate race and lots of House and governor races as well. But he's actually picking some people who use the establishment resources, who are working with the NRSC and top Republican polling firms. And so he's not exactly going after renegades every time. And so this Bannon imprimatur is going on people who are probably going to vote for McConnell for majority leader too. And so it's kind of a big show rather than backing these insurgents every time.
All right, let's talk about two quick Senate races. First, let's talk about Alabama there. A new Fox poll of the very red state has Democrat Doug Jones neck and neck with Republican Roy Moore. What's happening there?
So I think two things are happening. Moore is not getting a lot of support from the establishment of the Republican Party there. They view him as kind of out there, and he's not getting a lot of moderates. And I think Doug Jones is viewed as a reasonable choice in the eyes of a lot of those states' voters. And so that is weighing down on Republican chances. If Luther Strange, who Bannon referenced, if he was the candidate now, he would be blowing Jones out of the water. He would be easily reelected.
And let's flip the script a little bit in Virginia, because in that one, a Monmouth poll shows Republican Ed Gillespie is actually leading Democrat Ralph Northam in a one-point race. Gillespie actually had been trailing at some point. What kind of impact do you think would a loss like that have for Democrats in a state which had actually been for some time trending their way? We know President Obama is expected to campaign there as well for Northam later in the week.
It'd be a big morale loss for Democrats. They expect to win Virginia. They know the state is changing, but it's not changing rapidly enough demographically. There has been some polls that have shown Ralph Northam up a little bit, but it's a really tight race. And I think we should note that both candidates are pretty bland, and Northam is not a good campaigner. He's not very charismatic. He doesn't really have the fire in the belly that is going to attract a lot of people in this off-year election. And so Democrats are going to have to pour millions of dollars to have their candidate stand a chance.
All right, Daniel Littman breaking it down for us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Turning now to the Middle East, where in a major victory, the U.S.-led coalition fighting ISIS has recaptured the Syrian city of Raqqa. Raqqa, which has been under the terror group's control since 2014, had served as its de facto capital. It comes after months of brutal and devastating fighting there. And with the victory, along with ISIS's defeat in Iraqi city of Mosul over the summer, U.S.-backed forces have now captured nearly all of the terror group's territory in the region. Joining us now live from London, NBC News foreign correspondent Lucy Kavanaugh. Lucy, good to have you with us. So describe for us just how big of a defeat this is in the fight against ISIS worldwide and specifically against terrorism in general.
Well, Eamon, there's no doubt that this is a significant turning point in the war against ISIS, and perhaps even in conventional military terms, its end. Now, the city itself was freed by mostly Kurdish forces helped by U.S. Special Ops and coalition airstrikes. There are still fighters hiding in buildings and tunnels. They've certainly booby-trapped parts of Raqqa as they have in Mosul, so it's an ongoing operation. But in terms of holding territory, this was the last major ISIS stronghold. They do still have some border towns in between Iraq and Syria. Those are expected to fall. Mosul was very much the largest city the group has held in terms of population, but Raqqa was seen as the seat of power for ISIS. It was the very first major city they took in Syria. It was the de facto capital of the caliphate. Without Mosul, without Raqqa, the self-proclaimed caliphate is now effectively a thing of the past. So yes, this is a major blow to ISIS, but we should be cautious, Eamon, because it doesn't necessarily mean its end. ISIS still has the ability to launch attacks. The group might have lost territory, but the extremist ideology lives on. And that's because many of the issues that led to its rise haven't necessarily been addressed, whether it's insecurity, ethnic and sectarian grievances. And in the West, we've seen, unfortunately, that the mere idea of ISIS has often been enough to compel deranged individuals to plow, for example, cars into innocent people. So today we are talking about a major military victory, but there is still a long road ahead in fighting that ideology.
And not to mention, you had the thousands of foreign fighters that came to fight for ISIS now starting to try to return back to their home countries and could pose a security challenge. Lucy Kapanoff live for us in London this morning. Thank you. Still ahead, the security guard shot by the Las Vegas mass shooter breaks his silence on that fateful night. Plus, a new series of wildfires erupts in Northern California as crews work to try and contain the blazes. Bill Cairns is back with us with the very latest on the conditions for those firefighters.